Hello everybody, welcome to our first seminar. You are all in listen only mode and we would like you to type your questions in the questions box in the control panel rather than the chat box. I'm going to say that the title of today's seminar is Using Data in the International Context, and my colleague Tony Emmerson, who is Senior Deputy Head at the English College in Prague, has very kindly agreed to give the presentation, using data not based on exam results, applying data to teaching and learning, making it useful for your school, how to engage and motivate reluctant colleagues with data. If you do have questions with regard to the systems and products or anything with regard to Cambridge International, please type your questions into the question box, but we will answer those questions separately and on an individual basis. So we will do approximately 30 to 40 minutes of presentation, and there will be plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So I'm going to hand over to Tony. Hello.
Hello, and hello to everyone who's watching. I looked at the list of subscribers. We've got people all over the world, so there would have been a time when a broadcast coming from Prague around the world was from behind the Iron Curtain. It's more of a Corona curtain these days. So I hope that this is going to be useful, potentially interesting, potentially, and the source of some conversations in your school afterwards. I'm sure that we have some people watching who are true believers in the data cause, who are here to learn new ideas. We probably also have a few data cynics who've been sent here to be duly reprogrammed. And I'm going to talk about the important part that you'll pay later on. One final thing before I start: every school is different. Every school's questions are different. So I'm just going to give an indication of my experiences, my views, things that have worked in the context that I'm in. I'm never going to pretend I have the answers, but I'm always happy to try and answer questions when I can. So make sure everything is working here. A little introduction about who I am. I've been in Prague since 2007. The context of our school is that we're a combination of Czech and English, or British, should I say. We are a HMC school. We are focused on academic aspiration, but we have a flexibility, because we're part of the Czech system, to pick and choose the best of each country. And when I talk about the international context, that's one of the things that I'm going to refer to, this freedom that you have to educate, assess, and use data in the way that you want to and you think is right. We mainly have second language learners here. That's something that I'm going to address. We're an IB school. All our students do the diploma. Before coming here, I did used to teach in the UK, so obviously my views are UK transplanted to international. When I talk about the international context, and I deliberately use the word context rather than just an international school, because many of these things are transferable to the UK in one way or another. But the sort of things that make up this international context, in some ways it's a lack of things. We don't have to, in an international school, often have league tables. We're immune from the wonderful world of Progress 8 and working out what's in our buckets. We have the option of whether we have GCSEs or not. If so, which ones do we want to do? So there is a bit more freedom to operate. And when you're considering how you use data, the syllabus that you teach, the things that you want to assess, The more freedom you have with those, the more freedom you have to work with data that you think is meaningful. We have, in the international world, often fewer specific parental expectations. Our parents want a good education for their child. They want them to go often to university, but they're not going to come badgering about the specifics of what you're teaching, comparing it with the school down the road and waving league tables at you. A practical thing, very important, and when we talk about the use of chem data especially, English as an additional language. And again, this is transferable. There are many classrooms in the UK where for a lot of students, English is also an additional language for them. So how we deal with baseline assessments is probably similar to how they're dealt with in that case. We also have what I refer to as the international staff room. And you have a very diverse group of people often. Some have come from the UK, some have been on the international circuit for years, some are local people who have ended up working at that school, which means that they haven't been through the UK system in the same way as a whole. So again, the thinking can be more flexible, and sometimes you have this wonderful blank canvas that when you talk about using data to track progress, it doesn't bring back bad memories of things that they've had to do in the UK. Although there is some absolutely appalling practice out there, and occasionally one needs to deprogram before getting anywhere. So on the flip side of this, what does it mean for us and how we use data? We can be very idealistic. If you ask me what's the best thing about teaching internationally, often it's the opportunity to be idealistic. The raw data that you get from something like a chem baseline test becomes a lot more valuable than the pre-processed packaged things like predicted grades. Now, I would argue in the UK that is also the case, that the raw data that you get, the individual pupil profiles are the most important thing. But for us, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, it's even more important because it's not so focused on exams and predicted grades and all that sort of thing. Its focus is far more on informing teaching and learning. And that means that you can use data to create a positive culture where teachers feel it's there to support them, it's backing them up, it's a friend, not an enemy. Having this culture where data is viewed in a positive way and people know it's there to support them is so important. And when you're bringing a vision of how you use data into a staff room that may not have worked with it before in the same way, it's a great opportunity to get people interested and get people on board. Ideally, what your data will provide and what your systems will provide is something that gives teachers additional information about their pupils. We're long gone past the days when the first thing you knew about your pupils was just a list of names and the second thing was rows of faces. There is now so much information available to help teachers before that first encounter. Realistic aspirational targets and baselines, of course, recording and tracking academic progress. Ideally, and to make it work, you need to have a system that teachers will engage with in a positive way. If they're not engaging with it, then it's not going to work well at all. And yes, it is there at the bottom that it's about assessing school and departmental performance, so improvements can be made. But again, how this is responded to depends on whether it's presented in a positive way that it's about making improvements, or it's about finding fault. I would argue that the whole school data policy, the vision for how it's used, never really needs to be used in a negative way. If you've got an incompetent department or an incompetent teacher, there are plenty of ways of knowing that and dealing with it and addressing it, other than just pointing to what your data system churns out. Because as soon as you start using it for that purpose, it does start creating negative connotations. Now, I know that sounds a little bit on the hippie side, and trust me, I'm not on the hippie side when it comes to dealing with issues like capability, but data is too often seen as a negative thing, and especially if you're introducing it to a school where people really don't know what to think of it, getting them to think positive things is always the way forward. So let's look at the first thing. So you've got your new class, and you have information probably from Chem baseline tests if you're watching this, maybe from entrance exams, maybe from previous schools. First really interesting thing is what the Chem vocab thing, what the score tells you. We know when they're second language learners that their English is going to be good, but we often don't know how much it's masking. So when we started doing the Midias testing here a few years ago, it was no surprise that obviously our vocab scores were low. What really surprised many teachers were how high the mathematics and non-verbal sections were. And it really helps create that positive preconception. If you're dealing with second language learners, if teachers can get a glimpse beforehand at what's being masked by the language issues, it really can help them see pupils in a different way. Now, obviously, all teachers are going to be viewing all pupils in a positive way, but when you have your row of faces that you don't really know, who can barely communicate in English with you at this stage, a combination of their skill and their nerves and the whole new to the school thing, knowing that they're really strong at mathematics, knowing that they've got high non-verbal ability is interesting to know as a teacher. And I would really encourage that for all new classes, teachers and tutors have access to the raw data and they look through it. Another really interesting one, especially for international schools, is how it matches up against your other English indicators. Because your English department will have their own indicators, maybe entrance exams, maybe some sort of reading software, things like that. And often their first reaction, and I'm sorry to any broad-minded English teachers out there that I'm giving a slightly bad name to here, is that they've got their systems, they do the Chem vocab score, they don't quite understand what it means, and it seems to contradict what they already know, and it can be quite negative. I would say it's absolutely imperative that if you don't have someone from your English department who's done a Midias or a Yallis type test, they really, really should do it. They usually come away a lot more positive and they understand how it fits in with the other English indicators. To give you an example of one of our pupil profiles, we often get students who they've been in English language education, but the teaching of English hasn't had a great deal of depth to it. So they're superficially very fluent. They can hold a typical conversation, they can have a chat, but the weakness really gets exposed by the Chem vocab test. So once you start matching together any oral interview you've done, the Chem vocab, the English entrance exam, something else, you can get a real 3D picture of what that student's English abilities are like. You really need, again, if they're not engaged with it, you need to get them engaged. The Senko, whoever's in charge of dealing with learning difficulties, they need to understand the tests. And often, again, apologies to any broad-minded Senkos who are, open to everything. Often they've got their toolkit already of what they think works, and anything new to it can be slightly worrying. So again, once they do it, once they get a feel for it, it's not about replacing anything they already do. It's about adding to it. And finally, another chem-specific thing, mathematics. Obviously, the chem assessments are standardized and based mainly from UK schools. The way that some countries, the Czech Republic is an example of this, teaches mathematics is very different from the way that it's taught in the UK. It's much more old-fashioned and probably not very smiled upon at all by those who know edu things. However, they're really good at maths when they come. So you end up with a very, very distorted profile of many students at the very top end. I'm talking 145 plus on the chem scale. And as they go through the school, as they go through the school, that starts to become a bit more normal. So if they do mid-years, they're really, really at the top of it. By the time they do Yellis, they're sort of, quite good. And by the time they come to do IBE or Alice, it looks like they've fallen down a bit, but it's probably giving you a more representative number about where they are. So for those of you who do use chem, and actually those of you who don't, I would really recommend it. It is a fantastic system, and no, they're not paying me to say that. It really is very, very useful. Knowing what your vocab means and knowing what your mathematics means in context of the background of the students, the other indicators that you have, and how that country's education system works is really important when you are interpreting it. Second thing, targets and baselines. I'm a big believer in baselines rather than targets. I've never been quite sure with the target system what's meant to happen. So they meet the target. Do you keep it the same at that point, and cap a limit on their aspirations? Do you move it upwards and create a game that they can't win, because whenever they succeed, you manage to change the goalposts again? And please don't send me lots of comments about why targets are brilliant. I'm a big fan of baselines, where you have that minimum expectation and you're looking for students who fall below that. It's a broad system. It catches those who are falling behind a significant amount. It works in the international context, where you've got a very diverse cohort. You've got people coming from different schools, from different backgrounds. You need a broad system. Who decides what they should be? It really, in my experience, should be the tutor supported by the senior pastoral team. They are the people who can best connect the data with the child. And I know that's not always the case in schools, and it rests purely on the academic side. I would urge all of you who are implementing data policies, visions of how to use data in schools, wherever they are, if the pastoral side is not actively involved, do get them involved. They're the ones who can read the child best, or at least they should be. Make sure you decide at that point what the stakes are if someone is above or below their target or baseline. I would argue that it should always be about supporting the student. You need to get rid of any sense of reward or punishment. It's just an indicator of how they're doing. When you go to the doctor to get your blood pressure checked, you get the information and then you act on it. And for me, the way that I see the use of data in schools it's a similar approach. You decide how you're going to act on it, but the numbers themselves aren't judgmental. Another thing you need to decide is, are you going to have some sort of automatic inflation with the targets and baselines that you use? If you use a leveling system, then as the child gets older, the target would move with it. If you use a target that can be interpreted for each year in a different way, then it doesn't need to. This is coming back to that idea of a target where if they meet it, what happens next? Does it stay there and create a lid, or does it carry on moving upwards and give them something to chase? And what's the effect of doing that? And finally, and again, this is a real local context thing, who knows the details of the data that you're holding? If you tell a family or a child explicitly about some of the numbers that you're using, will it start a discussion, or will it just be a cause for judgment? And you really need to know your audience. You need to know effectively your customer base as to how they will receive this information. There are packages out there which make it really easy for you to produce reports for students, teachers, parents, without really asking the question as to whether that is the right thing to do. Here, just give them the give them a bit of paper that says the vocab's here, the maths is here, the non-verbal's here, and therefore this is who they are. You'll know from any encounters you've had with your parents about how information will be received. It's really interesting when new parents come to a school and their previous school has shared one of these sheets with them, how the parents use it. I've seen people use it to show me that one child is definitely not as bright as the other one, therefore we mustn't push them as hard. So these are just things for you to think about, and if you're not sure of the answers to these questions, then that's something that you should be looking at, in my opinion. Everything is in my opinion here. And then as you go through the school, what is it that you're actually measuring? And this is where the freedom and the independence becomes so valuable, and it's one of the things that I enjoy so much, because we're not tied to a league table, we're not tied to Progress 8. We do only a couple of GCSEs, so those numbers don't really matter. I would say that when you're deciding what you're measuring about pupils as they go through the school, the most important question is, what do you value? What is it that you want them to be? What is it that you want them to do? How do you want them to develop? And then measure it. There is that old saying that what gets measured gets done. And it's a little bit cynical, but it's quite often true. So I'll give you a practical example of how we did this at ECP. We want to get our students ready for the IB diploma. So we created a standardized assessment system that runs all the way through the school on the 7-to-1 IB diploma scale. And that rewards the skills and the knowledge required to do well at IB. So there is an emphasis on critical thinking, there's an emphasis on analysis and evaluation, there is a de-emphasis of just remembering things. Because in the local context, Czech education still revolves a lot around memorizing lists of facts. So a huge long list of things that you memorized is deemed to be a good thing. We wanted to create a system that encouraged the behaviors that we wanted to see, and we wanted to measure the pupils against that, So when we're having the discussion with parents about how they can improve, we're having a discussion with students about how they can improve along this ladder. Everyone wants to do well. We're making sure they get guided in the direction that we want to. We don't have to worry about what will their IGCSE score be, or so, yeah, or anything like that. So measure the thing that matters. One final word on that idea. It's such a simple idea, but so often it's not. It doesn't quite work out. Reward what you value. Whenever there's a contradiction between what you say you reward and what you actually want to see, it causes attention and things start falling apart. The same applies to pupils, the same applies to staff. I'm always minded of school experiences where you spend 11 months of the year being told about how everything is about a child-centered, holistic education that creates a rounded individual and makes them happy. And then come September, everyone's in the head's office getting chewed up about exam results. No one ever says at that point, well, your exam results are absolutely dreadful and this child is unemployable now, but they had a really great time, so well done. This transparency about what you're trying to encourage and therefore what you're measuring is important, because if what you're measuring is something that you believe in, if what you are measuring is something that you think is valuable, then that data is useful. If you want them to go in this direction, and for whatever reason the system is forcing you to measure in that direction, that's when the data becomes bogus. And it may fill spreadsheets. It certainly fills the minds of cynics at that stage. So do what you believe in, measure what you believe in, and decide how intervention happens. Again, our way of doing it is that if a child is falling behind in one or two subjects, the responsibility lies with the departments, with the faculties. If they're falling behind in a range of subjects, even if it's not by a huge amount, but it's a general dip, that's where the pastoral team really get involved, because they're the one who can spot it and centrally coordinate action. When it comes to getting your staff room engaged, getting your colleagues engaged, there are always obstacles that you find. With data, there tends to be a lack of trust. It just worries some people, where people have a lack of knowledge about it and not quite sure how it works. I mean, for schools who've been running a system like Chem for several years, it's an interesting question. How many of your teachers really understand it? How many of them could instantly read a pupil profile or a chances graph and tell you what it means? There's a fear of change. I mean, when you go from a school that isn't using data very much to one that starts using it more, some people get a bit nervous because they don't understand it. They associate it with management trying to do stuff to prove they exist. They worry that it's trying to prove they're bad teachers. Some of them are worried because it will expose that they are bad teachers. There's a whole load of different obstacles that come up against it. In the international type staff room, it's potentially more so because you have this big range of people in there who've come from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of systems, and will have had a whole different range of experiences depending on that. Some may be complete spreadsheet junkies, some of them may worry about using a mark book. It's amazing what you find. This diversity is one of the reasons why teaching in an international school is so rewarding and so much fun at times, but it's something to think about when you're bringing in an idea. And so I really think that if you're serious about using data in a school, Unless you're 100% confident that everyone is ultra happy about it, find a reason, find a way to do an audit. It's amazing what people don't know, and it's amazing what they don't want to admit. I remember when I took over as exams officer in the school years ago, the first thing I did was I did an anonymous survey to all staff, asking them about what they were worried about and what they, what they would like training on. And I deliberately made it anonymous, and I found out that at least half the staff lived in fear of ever having to start or finish an exam. And in the event of a fire going off, precisely nobody was sure what to do, despite the fact they've been doing it for years and years and years, and they sort of think they know what to do, but they don't really want to admit it. So if you're changing the way you use data, if there's a new initiative coming, take the chance to do an audit, find out what people know, make it anonymous if you think there is a chance that people don't want to show that after several years of supposing being one of the leading people using Chem in the school, they're unsure of something. I don't normally go for anonymous stuff, but it does work. Aim for 100% of your teachers and relevant staff to know how this stuff works. If necessary, blanket training and then have someone responsible for doing a session with all the new staff when they come in, and you can turn it as a refresher for existing staff on what the policies are, how to use it, how to read the documents that you have. Try and keep that 100% level going, because so often a school will invest time and energy, they do a big training session, then people start leaving, staff changes, and the knowledge drops down again. So aim for that. There's the old thing that people don't follow what you do, they follow why you do it. And one of the themes I've been talking about here is the use of data in a positive way. If you want to engage people, if you want people actually using it, doing what they're supposed to, they need to be following a why that they believe in. And the why that any teacher worth their salt believes in is that it's of benefit to the pupils. So something for you to reflect on in your school is, how is the use of data perceived? If you're about to introduce a new initiative, what will people think about it? And you need to get a wide range of opinions. Don't just go to your data enthusiasts. We all have them. They're absolutely wonderful. They're amazing. They work hard. They'll make a little nest of spreadsheets in a corner somewhere, and they're really happy there. And any initiative you come up with that involves data, they'll automatically love. Court the cynics. Find out what they think. Find out, you've got your staff room, you've got your radiators, radiating energy, you've got your drains. Find the open sewers. Find the people who are normally really grumpy about everything and stress test any plan you have past them, even if they don't especially like it, because they will pick the holes in it that you need to know about. And if you can find a vision for how data is going to be used that even your grumpiest cynic cannot argue with, then you know that you're onto a winner there. Finally, when you're using data, remember it's there to support professional judgment, not replace it. It's really, really important that teachers never feel that it's there to devalue what they think. It's important that nobody ever goes on automatic pilot and they just start relying on what the spreadsheet shows them. So it's there to support professional judgment, and make that somewhere in your vision, in your initiative, in your plans, whatever you want to call it, whatever works for you, make it part of your stated aim. A few suggestions. based on my experience here, as I can see that we're coming towards the end of our time, everyone on the teaching staff should have access to all the data generated by things like chem, entrance exams, and so on. I hear of schools where it's almost like this is kept as hidden secret knowledge, and that just arouses suspicion and annoyance. So make it all available so your enthusiasts can go data mining if they want to. Make it so that if people suddenly have a thought about a student or a thought about a particular class and something isn't sitting easy with them, one of the first things they can do if they want to is go to the raw data and have a dig around and see what's going on. You do need someone that makes sure that the basics are presented in a way that everyone can understand and interpret, but do let people roam free amongst the numbers if they wish. The key to implementing any strategy, any vision across the school, is to make sure that the lowest level of engagement is within the reach of everyone, but is non-negotiable. So make sure, if this matters to you, if this is what you want to do, that somewhere in the procedures and processes that everyone has to follow, there is some sort of concrete engagement with data that no one can get out of. An example of this, they're called Look and Wonder. I've been trying to find a better name. Please, if anyone could suggest a better name, it just sounds so role play-ish. But it's a really good thing to do. Have teams of people, whether they are to do with year groups, tutors, faculties, looking at the raw data to do with the pupils they're dealing with, and just seeing if anything jumps out at them, seeing if they spot a pattern, seeing if it starts a conversation. You can't make the pattern spotting obligatory, but you can make the looking at it and just make it part of the daily or at least regular process that your school has when reviewing what's going on, that there is some looking at raw data. How many of your teachers have had a mining session with the raw data? That's the question. You need a strategic team. You don't have to be a head or senior leadership to build a team. Everyone in a school is a leader. Everyone in a school can build a team. And this is where you want your blend of your data enthusiasts, but control them. Your data enthusiasts can do more harm than good, because so often they're pace setters rather than coaches. They confuse people. They present them with spreadsheets with so many different colors on. It's like having a terrible hangover. Even though that they individually can do great things with it, they can do a lot more harm than good. So build a strategic team that has people who believe in coaching, people who will take people along with them. And yes, somewhere in the people that you're bouncing ideas off, your classroom cynics, do use them. Make sure that any project that you have involving data is something that can evolve. It is not the word of the management slapped down in front of everyone that this is now what we do. This is how we're going to use a chances graph. This is how we're going to use a pupil report. That feeling that people can contribute to it, that there is a stake in engaging with it to change it, is important. And last of all, do keep the faith with what you are doing. If you are using data for the benefit of pupils, that is a good thing. And you need to be persistent with that. Even when you're dealing with a very wide-ranging staff room, make sure you're persistent. Try and keep people with you. Keep going on it. Because once you have these systems in place, they will last if they're good. Really, my last thought on this is how you can use the data for evaluation. We can produce these value-added reports. A question for any international school, because their cohort is so diverse, how to use the value-added reports. Personally, I'm really not interested, well, I'm curious, but I don't put a great stake on how we compare to other schools in particular subjects. I'm interested in how we are doing on a year-on-year basis, because we have our certain profile of students. No other school have exactly the same profile. Make sure your subject leaders especially understand how to read a value-added profile, because it can be very illuminating, and especially if you've had a cohort that wasn't so great, your value-added result can really be a source of encouragement, because although your headline numbers dipped, your value-added didn't. On the other hand, it is a great way of avoiding complacency. And this is another thing, international schools, you may not have that much competition around you. You're not part of a league table system. How are you doing? And your value added, even if your results are great, but your value, well, I say great, they appear great on the surface. If your value added isn't so strong, that tells you something about how you need to view yourself and what the next step should be. So it was interesting to benchmark yourself against other schools, but always remember it's about you and your school getting better. And make sure that once you have done this, your department, your subject teachers are involved as much as possible. If you see problems or they see problems, fix it as low down the school as possible. It gives me a headache when people are analysing the results of the upper sixth, the year 13, the second year IB class, and they believe that any problem that they find can be fixed by better teaching paper one. Look for ways, with the freedom that you have sometimes in the international context, look for ways to change your curriculum. Look for ways to build in those skills. Look for ways to assess the skills that you need to build at the top. So your value added and your own analysis may show that you have gaps there when they take their final IB or take their A levels. What's the lowest point down you can fix this? That's the question for you. And never forget why you're doing it, the keep the faith thing. It's not easy sometimes being the person who leads data in a school. It's not easy being the one who is selling the vision. And too often in schools, people are given the task of doing things for data without that clear, compelling vision why. So to those of you who have a clear, compelling vision, fantastic. If you're not quite sure, that is something to think about. It may make your life a lot easier. We're now at the point where I'm going to try and field some questions. You've obviously been very patient listening, because I can see that only one person's escaped. So we're doing we're doing quite well there. Obviously, people couldn't find the exit button. Obviously, questions can go quite quickly, so I'll just take this final moment to wish all of you watching and anyone watching the recording, of course, good health, and I hope that everyone remains safe in these rather strange times. Now I'm going to find out from Suzanne, are there any questions? And please make them easy ones.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Tony. That was really, really interesting. And as Tony says, questions go very, very quickly. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody who has been listening. Please, if you do have some questions, could you type them into the questions box? I have got a question. Can you share a student's profile which the teachers have collaborated with, some analysis done on the student's needs, and the developmental plan, which is quite a big question?
Well, as in, can I share our proprietary intellectual information with the rest of the world for free? Or is the question, can that be shared with the student and the parents?
I think that was, can you, Tony, share an example?
Well, I'm not going to share specifics, and of course, under GDPR, if I say too much in anything, I could end up in trouble. I don't think there is a specific model that any school should be trying to emulate. I think decide what it is you want to do, what data you have available, and when are the points when it can have the most impact. And if you have those three things in mind, your systems will evolve themselves. So, for instance, what we do, I'm going to talk in very general terms. When our students arrive, they have entrance exams. We also do, if they come in at the start, mid-years with them. That information will then go to the tutor, and they will set a baseline grade pretty much on the data alone. Now, they'll have the chance to amend that when they get to know the child a bit more, but you've got to be wary of this. If people amend too much from their personal interaction with the child, what you end up with is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this, and I'm going to resort to gender stereotypes here, mainly because this is often the model you get. You have a girl who is very, very conscientious, immaculate notebook, always there on time, always asks the questions. And despite the fact that the chem scores and the entrance exams are low, the expectation gets raised because of this child and how they present themselves. They become the ones that are obviously going to be the high flyer, the extra work gets piled on, and then they have a nervous breakdown. On the other hand, you've got the lad who comes across, frankly, as a bit of a finding a polite word, a bit of an idle so-and-so, and probably not that bright, and yeah, not much hope for him. And it just happens to be a strange anomaly that on his chem he was through the roof, and on the entrance exam he blitzed it. And if people spend too long thinking about the students themselves without referring to the raw data, you end up undoing some of the work you're doing. I'll hasten to add that obviously lazy girls and hard-working boys are also available if you want. And an interesting exercise, and this I would recommend to schools really anywhere, is anonymize 2 or 3 individual pupil profiles that will surprise teachers, and throw them up on the screen on a training day and ask them to guess who the pupil is. This is especially relevant where you're still introducing new initiatives and not many people are familiar with the individual pupil profiles. So, throw on the screen that profile where it's all very high, but obviously everyone knows that the kid's not very bright. And the discussions that emerge from that, and the amount of cognitive conflict as teachers and colleagues try and match the two things is fantastic. And I always think in a case like that, if they'd seen the profile before they've seen the student, how would they have treated them differently? And that's always a question that can be asked. So back to the original question, I think decide what you want to do. If you know what you want to do, there's lots of advice out there, but it's a mistake to start with another model and think, I want to emulate that. Emulate no one. Decide for your school how you want it to work, and then take the advice from there.
Thank you very much. We have got a plethora of questions. I'm not entirely sure we're going to get through them all in our allotted time, but we will answer them afterwards, which will come to an email to you all. So I'm going to say, next one is, who ideally should be responsible for being in charge of data in an international school?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. It needs to be someone who has the vision if it's going to be believed. Now, I know that words like vision get frowned upon. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not your typical management type, maybe, and people can get quite cynical when people talk about vision. But trying to do things for the right reason, people will follow it. Now, if it's a member of the senior leadership team, they have to really be selling this positive vision of how they're using data. It shouldn't be the same person who is responsible for chewing people out for poor exam results. I think it's an absolutely perfect role for a middle leader in a school, or sort of assistant head type position, where they've got enough access and enough influence to be heard. It's a wonderful role for someone to make their own. And I would say, because I'm aware there's a whole range of people who will be listening to this, if you're someone who you're in a school, you want promotion, but none of the existing stereotypical roles really fit you, and you're good with spreadsheets, make yourself by default the person who has the vision for data.
I have to say, Tony, that I'm laughing because that was exactly how I got my data role when I was teaching.
And it gives you, it's what I did as well, but it gives you a wonderful platform to then show a wider range of skills that people didn't know you had, because you spend all your time in the classroom. So while on the other hand, on one hand, it may seem like it's a spreadsheety role, it's also a role where you're going to communicate and try and persuade and build teams and do all the sorts of stuff that marks you out as a potential leader in the school. So I would, the way that we do it, I sort of hurdled in that I was the person who really started it off before I held the role that I do now. And now it's sort of delegated out a little bit. And it depends very much on personality. Again, there isn't a one size fits all. I think they need to understand both the numbers and education. And I know that some schools deploy some excellent data managers who aren't actually teachers. But if they don't know, if they don't have a feel or an understanding for what the school's doing educationally, what they produce isn't always very useful. I've seen several situations, because I do get around a little bit, where I've been shown sort of various data dashboards and other things that look absolutely fantastic. And then the person in front of me has just said, but nobody knows how to use it. It's become an exercise in number crunching rather than. So I think if you can find a person who wants to do it, it's a wonderful opportunity for someone in middle leadership or someone who's still primarily a teacher to show their skills.
I think we've got time for one last question. Short answer, please. You mentioned a pastoral team. What do you mean by that?
By that I mean the tutors, and then either the heads of year or the heads of house. And I know there's a feeling in some schools that you have the academic team, so you've got your heads of department, and sometimes the tutors and the senior tutors see themselves as either totally non-academic or even at the worst defending the poor darlings from the evil, horrible academic people. It's not held by a standard school structure that says you've got deputy head academic, deputy head pastoral, and then two teams going down. But by the pastoral team are the tutors and so on who have that rounded view of the child that is not seen through the prism of one particular subject.
That's great. Thank you very much. So thank you again, everybody, for attending and listening. Sorry about the slightly late start. More information will come to you, including the recording, and the questions we haven't answered, we will be able to answer and send information to you. And we're hoping to do some more webinars. So if you've got any suggestions about particular topics that you'd be interested in, please send them in. So thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone who's tuned in.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.